So, Kara, thank you so much for joining. It's such a pleasure having you here on our podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kara, let me tell you this thing, right? I do a lot of podcasts, I do a lot of interviews, and after a long time, I was feeling nervous. And I was telling to one of my friends that today I'm going to interview someone who I believe should be on Oprah's show
Thank you.
because I would like to talk to you about your purpose driven organization that you run called Hint. I would love to dig deeper um, in the book that you have written, Undaunted. And before we get on to these interesting conversation and your experiences in the space of entrepreneurship, would love to take you back in your childhood. So if you may just share a lesson that you have learned from your family during your childhood days that continue to serve you today as well in your entrepreneurial journey.
So many different lessons. I was the last of five children.
Mhm.
And so I think by the time my parents had me, they were tired. So from all of my sisters and my brothers and for any parents out there, they understand what I mean. But I was very inquisitive. I was always asking why. But I think that one of the big lessons that comes to mind right now is that you have to be able to do things that maybe you don't necessarily want to do in
Mm,
order to that you have to be able to as I tell my children, sometimes you have to take the garbage out, sometimes you have to clean, you have to do these things in order to get to the next steps.
mm,
And I think it's an important piece that I think everyone needs to know, and every great entrepreneur understands this too. It's that you can't be just about pointing to things. You have to be able to roll up your sleeves and actually go and do something in order to be able to really do the things that you ultimately want to do.
mm.
And I think that as I tell people, when Google was first starting out, I mean, I'm sure that um, Larry and Sergey, like they were, coding, they were trying to fix things in their computers. They weren't just telling people to go do things, and so you have to be able to be scrappy, be wanting to go and do things. But I think it really boils down to also always having a need to satisfy this curiosity,
Mm,
and always uh know that when there's hard things that happen, oftentimes we place ourselves into those hard situations,
mm,
right? And those are ours to decipher. What are we supposed to be learning from these moments? So they
mm,
may not always turn out the way that we want them to. Maybe we're uh, going out and looking for funding, and the funding isn't happening as fast as we want it to happen. What are we supposed to learn about it? Is our pitch deck not what it should be? Are we meeting with all of the wrong people?
mm.
Maybe there's something there that we should be learning along the way that's ultimately going to help us, maybe not in this journey, but maybe in the next journey, to be smarter about something. And so
Wow.
that would be how I would answer that.
Wow. So there's so many lessons that you learned during your childhood days. And these are the lessons that you spoke about, right? Not to be scrappy and to reflect and to revisit if something is not working. What could be the need of the hour? Are we using the wrong pitch? Are we using the wrong deck? Are we meeting the wrong people? So that we can reflect and make the necessary changes. While going through your book, Undaunted, I could actually walk with you when you first knocked the door of Times, when
Mm-hmm.
you were interviewed at CNN, or when you started to work with the AOL. The conversation that you had with Ted Turner, right? I'm just curious, having worked with organizations like Times and CNN and AOL, and having dabbled with technology and media, why did you decide to start your entrepreneurial journey in the beverages industry? What was that moment?
Well, I never thought about being an entrepreneur. I was always very curious about companies. I guess Time was probably the least entrepreneurial company that I've ever worked for. But when I was CNN was really the first entrepreneurial company that I thought this it, it's it was very risky, I guess, to many people, but I thought it was exciting because
Mm,
it showed that there was a possibility in media, that media could change and it
mm,
might not work out. But I thought I could be at a place that is writing a new phase. And I didn't look for an opportunity like that. They looked for me. And I was just starting out. I mean,
mm,
it was just an opportunity. And back then, and this is the early 90s, the opportunity was go work for a traditional company, which I had already worked for at Time. I could go work for ABC or, some other big news network, or I could go and work for something like CNN where a founder is still running around the office with a crazy idea and it might work out, it might not work out. And and I think when I left that role, I moved to San Francisco from New York. I was engaged to be married, and my husband wanted to do technology law. He had just graduated from law school.
mm,
And so I was looking around it's San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and I had an Apple computer. Back in college, I was lucky enough. I used my babysitting money to purchase a computer. I was a journalism major, so I didn't want to do. You have to understand that many of the computers were much bigger, much more complicated. And when Steve Jobs came out with this computer, that was, the iMac. It was great. It was smaller. It wasn't as small as they are today, but it was wonderful. So when I moved to Silicon Valley, that was the name that I kept thinking of as an association with Silicon Valley. And I thought maybe I'll try and figure out how to get a job at Apple.
mm,
Now, I kind of I talk a lot about putting up walls in front of you. I put up a wall at that point when I moved, thinking that I wouldn't be able to get a job at Apple because I wasn't an engineer. I never
mm,
tried to get a job. But as I was researching Apple, and again, really loved the idea that it was this beautiful product and maybe I could work, for Steve Jobs and had all these dreams. That's when I stumbled upon this small startup that had spun out of Apple.
mm.
And you think back on times when maybe you ran into something and you think, oh, well, that's interesting. Has that ever happened to you where
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
sort of purely by accident, and maybe you aren't stopped by that, and you move on to something else, but sometimes you're stopped by something. And I think that this was for me a time when I felt, oh, that's interesting. There's five guys that had worked for Steve,
Mm,
and they started this company that was doing CD-ROM shopping.
mm,
And I love to shop. I love to catalog shop.
mm,
And I thought, what is he doing with shopping?
mm,
I was curious. And so I picked up the phone and I called one of the people who was quoted in this article, and he answered the
mm,
phone. And I said, I just moved here from New York. I was working in New York for CNN. And I was curious if there's any roles at your company. I
mm,
thought, what in the world? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? He says no. But I just thought, if nothing else, maybe I have a new friend. Maybe he knows of other roles at other companies. And when I sat down with him, again, I never really thought about it as moving out of media, but I
mm,
thought about it as kind of this new idea that was being developed. And after the lunch meeting, he offered me a role. He said, would you be interested? He said, you've worked for a startup. But I never even really thought of CNN as a startup. I thought about it as a lesser media company.
mm,
But I thought I thought, okay. And I'll never forget, he offered me a salary that was higher than what I was getting at CNN. And it was very, the one thing that really made a difference to me too, that I remember very visually, is that we were in one room. There were a bunch of desks in one room. There were no offices like what I had seen in New York, and they were all wearing jeans and t-shirts.
Mm.
And I thought, and incredible, like PhD, masters, and incredible, very smart people.
Mm.
But I remember thinking, this is really interesting. What's the worst that can happen if I take this role?
Mm.
Maybe I leave. And that's okay. I mean, I don't even have to put it on my resume, right? If it doesn't work out. But they gave me such a big responsibility to go and talk to retailers. And these were retailers that I had purchased products from, The Gap, J. Crew, all these amazing. And I thought, I get to call on these companies. Maybe I'll get to shop while I'm, calling on these companies. And then, little did I know, about a year later, when the company was out raising money, one of our investors was America Online, and they, instead of actually putting more money into the company, they said, why don't we just acquire you?
Wow.
So we were acquired by America Online. Something I always share with entrepreneurs is, people want to talk about AOL as, a lot of different things. People talk about AOL, the training wheels for the internet. I mean, this was, many people thought of it as, this massive success. When America Online acquired our company, it was
Mm.
called Two Market. They were clearly number 3. I mean, behind a company called CompuServe and Prodigy, they were not number 1. And so again, the underdog, the fighter, watching Steve Case come to his all hands meeting and saying, we're going to do this. It's great. There were a lot of people saying, I don't know. I mean, there's a chance that he won't, but
Mm.
it's interesting what he's talking about. So fast forward 7 years,
Mm.
they asked me when they acquired our company to take the e-commerce and shopping partnerships and develop a team and grow it out, which I did. And it was $1 billion in revenue to AOL.
Wow.
When I left there, that's what you and I were talking about before this segment started, that I never really realized that I needed to go learn again, that I
Mm.
had been in this situation, that I had a team of a couple hundred people who were directly or indirectly working for me. I was mentoring, I was managing, I was the youngest vice president at America Online. I was one of the few women at my level. And I think when I left, I wanted to spend some time with my family. I wanted to be on the plane a lot less than I was. But I never really thought about it as switching industries, going and starting
Yeah.
my own company. Um, and I think it's a really important point, because people have said, are entrepreneurs constantly thinking about going and starting their own company? Maybe. I mean, there are definitely some people who maybe they're born with it. Maybe they know from a very young age that eventually they're going to start their own company, or they think, I'll never work for anyone again.
Mm.
I need to go. But I think there are many people who do it because they believe in something that they can go and lead others to really understand. And they see a hole in the market
Mm.
that they think that they can expand on. So long-winded story, but that was really my story, that
Yeah.
I stumbled upon, starting Hint just because of that.
So, what was the reason? What gave birth to Hint? You spoke about the spirit that you picked up having worked
Yeah.
with entrepreneurs, right? What gave birth to Hint? Why water? When You knew that you're going to compete with the giants of the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas of the world. You're going to compete with the giants of companies which are already selling water. What was the reason to come up with the idea called Hint and that says zero calorie sweeteners?
So I was starting my family and taking a break, taking some time off from tech. And when I started looking at how I was feeling overall, and there were clues like I had developed terrible acne on my skin. I was overweight. I had sort of accepted that that was just the way it was going to be. I had never really dieted, but I was starting to think about dieting and looking at these different diet plans that were out there. And that's when I looked at my drink one day, and it was my diet soda, Diet Coke in particular, that I happened to be looking at the ingredients on the label. And I didn't understand what I was putting into my body. And I thought, this is so curious that I would actually accept the fact that I'm putting something into my body that I think is safe, but I don't know if it's safe. And I was doing a very barely Google search on trying to understand what these things are. And there were many things that I couldn't actually understand. And so
Mm.
I thought maybe I should put this to the side. I would do the same with food if this was a food item, but I had never really focused on my drink. And at that point, the calories, it wasn't at 0 calories. This is 2004. It was at 10 calories. So they hadn't quite perfected the 0 calorie diet movement at that point. But I thought, I'm going to put this to the side and see what happens. So 2.5 weeks later, I swapped out my diet soda for plain water. And 2.5 weeks later, my skin cleared up, my energy levels were back, and I had lost over 20 pounds in two and
Wow.
a half weeks. And I thought, this is crazy. I felt so significantly better. And I thought, why are there so many people who believe that they are doing better by drinking and eating diet or low fat? And here I am, a smart person, a successful person, educated person, all of those things. And yet I was tricked. I was fooled by this. And when I would talk to friends of mine who would notice that I had gone through a pretty big transformation in a short amount of time, I thought there are a lot of people who are just like me, who are just assuming that someone else is doing the checks for them. And I thought, if it's actually there's two parts to it. There's that, and then there's also the other aspect, which is truly health. That is, are there people out there who are trying to fight type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, cancer, things that are really, really critical, right? It's not just about how you're, looking or feeling. It's about, the clock is ticking, right? If you don't actually figure out what you're putting into your body and how your body is responding to it. I thought, when people talk about these diets, why isn't there more conversation around the uniqueness and how somebody is processing sweet? And I saw it so clearly, but as you and I discussed, it I was one of the only ones. I would talk to friends of mine in the medical profession
Mm.
about what I was seeing, and they'd say, "Oh, that's really interesting." And I think that you're onto something, but it was not proven. And so I felt like I was gifted um, this journey to go on, to go and seek. And I think more than anything that's something that I always say to people, that instead of trying to figure out, why you're thinking this way or being frustrated by something, taking that time to go on this journey is a very, very powerful thing. And yet most people, they don't want to deal with the headache. They don't want to
Yeah.
learn, right? They want to deal with the frustrations, and they have too many other things to do. And frankly, they shouldn't become an entrepreneur, because I think that the journey of an entrepreneur is a seeker, is a disruptor, is somebody who is against the grain, I guess is the best way I can
Mm,
think of to describe it.
yeah, I love the word seeker and disruptor and against the grains. In one of the interviews, Kara, you spoke about that there was a moment when you realized that it was my calling. Just curious, so many of us come across these moments, and I personally call these kind of moments as defining moments.
Mhm.
How did you realize that's your moment that's going to define your life? What shifted within you that gave you an evidence that, you know what, that's my calling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that. I think there's points along the way where you get signs that this is that you're headed in the right direction. Some days maybe you feel like you're headed in the right direction, and then you take 3 steps backwards because you realize that it wasn't exactly right. But I think for me, it was more of this acceptance of so many people. I think that they join a profession, and then their goal is to become a manager and a director, a vice president, maybe the CEO of the company, or maybe they switch companies in the same industry to rise on the ladder. And I think for me, I felt like where I was having the most fun was going back down to the bottom again and trying to go and learn something and create something along the way. So I I think I'm still learning along the way. I don't know that I've actually totally defined what my purpose is, but in the meantime, I think what I do know is that I'm helping people, and I
Mhm.
think it's something that no matter what I do for the rest of my life, I think I need to be in some kind of role where I'm helping people. I see some kind of measurement where people uh, are being helped in a way for the better, right? So call it a mission, call it a purpose driven company. I think it could be in beverages, it could be in tech, it could be in something totally a nonprofit. I have to be doing something that really is tangible and is helping people. And I think for me that journey just continues on. I don't think there's one point along the way that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and better.
Thank you so much, Kara, for sharing,
Mm-hmm.
and especially accentuating on the fact that for as long as it's fun, for as long as it's getting bigger and better, and above all, for as long as you've been able to serve people, you'll continue to walk on that path. And as you said, to continue to be a seeker, to continue to be a disruptor. What are those three basic lessons that you have learned in your last 16 years?
I think probably the biggest no the biggest lesson is understanding that people are people, right? That it doesn't matter what role they're in, or how high they get up on the ladder. I think that your ability to actually want to learn and want to dig into a situation is absolutely critical. I think also the concept of gratitude and an appreciation never goes away either. And no matter what industry, no matter how old you get or up the ladder. And I would say that the last one is that nothing is ever too hard to figure out. I think it's someone once said to me, it's figure outable, right? I don't know that that's exactly a word, but it sort of lays the groundwork for. I think so often people put up their own walls to say that, oh, something can't happen just because it hasn't happened. But instead, if you start to think about things and you believe that maybe you can go figure them out, most things can actually be figured out. It's that we haven't actually tried to figure them out, or the right people haven't been placed in the room to actually go and figure those things out. So those are,
Yeah.
I think, that the three things that I um, subscribe to. And I think, to some extent, those things help me to be more interested in civilization, right? That you think back on, how do things expand, and how do we just get better, and how do we um, have more connections? It's all of those things as well. It's gratitude. It's your ability to jump in, and um, your ability to practice those things that I think are really what matter more than anything else.
Thank you so much for bringing this important element of gratitude, because that's one of my core values. And I often use the word shukrana in my interviews, in all the other work that I do, right? And I would definitely get back to the three key learnings that you have mentioned, that people are people no matter what level of the hierarchy they are at, what background they're coming from. The second one, you spoke about gratitude and appreciation. And third one, which is definitely a key learning for me, that nothing is too hard to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get back to your book. Why Undaunted? I mean, you call this book Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. Why did you choose this theme to write about?
Yeah, well, first of all, this was a book that stemmed out of many years, really the last 6 years of journaling and thinking about some different questions that entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs were asking me about. And I felt like there was this kind of mystery that was out there amongst people that maybe had made it in some people's minds, or had gone and done it the right way, that kind of was getting in the way of other people moving forward. And I thought, if people would actually live undaunted, maybe they would go out and try more things, because it really stems back to, things can't happen. Companies can't be made. Products, new services can't actually be developed. CNN can't be developed. Apple computers can't be developed. All of the AOL, all of these different things, unless somebody actually takes a chance and tries to go out and do something. Now, are those fearless risk takers? Maybe. Or were they curious and they just decided to start to build on something, and then consumers liked it, and they wanted to purchase it. They wanted to borrow it. They wanted to have some sort of affiliation with it. And so I thought, over time, I started to see the connection. It didn't matter what industry I had been in. These people that I knew or had read about, they they were they were not fearless risk takers. They were just people who were just trying to try, and they weren't afraid of failure. They had lived undaunted. They had moved forward in a way that probably a lot of other people wouldn't, because they feared failing. Those people feared failure. They didn't view themselves as a risk taker. They wanted the rules to be written for them. They wanted the map. And and what I believed is that if I could actually share, through my own story, through my own journey, how I didn't have all the answers. There's different chapters, headings. For example, fly the airplane as you're building it. Maybe not literally, hopefully not, but there's a things that I learned along the way, that you try to get your product into the market. You're going to have mistakes along the way. Things aren't going to be perfect, but you're going to learn from those things. And I think that those are things that seem so obvious to me, maybe seem so obvious to other entrepreneurs. Yet for people who haven't started, or for people who are in it right now and are trying to come out with the perfect product before they launch it, my message to those people is you have to just get it out of the gate, because you're going to learn a lot of things about it. It really isn't perfect, even when you think it's perfect. And so, again, through my own journey, through my own stories, I felt like I could really share a lot. And, even thinking back on the book was totally turned in before the pandemic. And I've learned a lot even since the pandemic and since my book has been out about leading, that I think back on, my journey in 2008, 2009, which is one of the chapters in the book about fundraising. And we learned quite a bit during that time, and it was a scary time. And it's something that I share with entrepreneurs today that have 2 years worth of capital in the bank, because you never know when a scary situation is going to come up and you're going to have to tighten your belt, and maybe you won't be able to go to banks and get money. The beginning of the pandemic, we didn't quite have 2 years worth of capital. And that was the first thing, as we were all moving in the US into sheltering in place and not going into offices. That was when I looked at my CFO and I said, we need to go and raise money. And he said, this is not going to be able to happen. And I said, we cannot allow Zoom to keep us from raising money. We have to use Zoom for what it is meant to be, a tool. And we have to figure out, again, this was, 20 months ago now, we need to figure out how to use that in a way that will help us.
Wow.
If I wouldn't have been through the 2008, 2009 financial crisis and kind of the challenges and the hard times, I don't think I would have been as prepared for the pandemic. And I think many entrepreneurs that I met and have met even during this time, it's been harder for others than it was for us. But I think I look back on the challenging times and use those as gifts those were the clues to the puzzle that I would need in the future, if that makes sense.
And I also, while going through your book, I loved one of your quotes that says, what's the worst that can happen? And you've used it multiple times, right? So, Kara, having gone through so many ups and downs, whether the era of 2008 and 2009 or the COVID times that we all are going through, and when I asked you about the 3 lessons that you have learned in your last 16 years of this journey, you spoke about people are people, gratitude and appreciation. Nothing is too hard to figure out, right? At the same time, in your book, very specifically, you have mentioned, this is when I became aware how important kindness can be in business, especially on the part of the leader. What does that mean? And how can a leader demonstrate kindness on day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, there were so many. I mean, the interesting thing about this book is that the book was over when I originally wanted to turn it in. Probably the hardest part about writing a book that I share with other wannabe authors is that we had to cut it down and cut it in half. But I think that the most important thing for me in that point was just recognizing that you have to be a kind person. You have to be a leader that is compassionate and has empathy along the way, because I think that it's a time when, especially during the financial crisis for us, especially when sometimes, during this pandemic, for example, when you've got to lead people during a time when they're scared, they're afraid. What is happening? Maybe they're dealing with homeschooling their children, or they have ill parents, right, that they're dealing with, their family. I think that recognizing that we're all in this together, and that we have to, you can lead a company and continue to lead a company, but you have to be a kind person. No longer are the best leaders people I never thought that they were, but maybe they had their moment where they were not the nicest people in the world. I think that you have to lead with compassion and know that more than anything, that it will come back to help you, not hurt you, by being a nice and a kind person.
Thank you, Kara, for sharing. Kara, what I'm listening is that has been definitely one of your mantras of establishing credibility. What could be the other ways that could help a leader establish credibility in a new environment?
I think jumping in is, I guess this goes back to one of my first lesson, your ability to always be able to understand the roles inside of your company and be helpful, I think is such a key thing. And it's, I think people think that as you're growing, uh, as you're hiring people in to do the role, that you never really walk away, or the best leaders never really walk away from being able to understand exactly what is necessary in order to continue moving that area to the best, to the next level. Or maybe there's a problem in the area, and your role as a CEO is to come in and help in
Hmm.
order to move it to the next level. So I think it's constantly looking at the company in ways where how can you be helpful. So maybe you are not an engineer, maybe you don't know how to code, but I say to many entrepreneurs that I know that I took basic code. I hire people who are much better at me than doing that, but I have the ability to jump in and actually do a little bit, enough to get me in trouble in order to be helpful to the team, but also understand some of the challenges that they're going through. I think
Hmm.
that that's very, very important for any leader today, to be able to be that person.
To at least know that much, that where you can actually understand their language, empathize with them, and if the need be, come up with a better solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kara, I'm sure you would have encountered situations in your life where you would have said to yourself, nah, I can't do it anymore. Where you thought of dropping everything and getting back to your own shell. If you may share one of those instances, and how did you deal with that particular event of your life?
I think in growing a company, you have so many different situations where you think maybe something very challenging happens and you think, oh gosh, I can't go on anymore. But I think I've always wanted to go back to uh, what the customer says that the product is doing. And I think that this is true certainly at Hint, but also at every other company that I was at. When you understand who your customer is and how your customer is being helped in some way, that is like the keys to the kingdom, right? For those days that are challenging times along the way. And I think that I kept coming back and still go back to consumers, sharing challenges with diseases that they've had. So type 2 diabetes, we were talking about that. We've had so many consumers who have written to us who have said that it was such a big challenge for them until a product like Hint came out, that they didn't like the taste of water. We've also heard from many people who have been trying to get through chemo treatments from cancer. And there's a metallic taste you get in your mouth when you go through chemotherapy. And many people are trying to get through that, and they don't know how to get through it because water, it just enhances that metallic taste. And again, if you've never been through this, you don't have an understanding of maybe what they're going through, but this is something that they're thinking about every single day. And so to be able to create a product that is helping people get through something very, very challenging, anytime I've had those challenging days where maybe I don't like what a customer has said, or something doesn't go the way that I want to go, I'll go back to our customer emails, or I'll go sit in on a customer service phone call and think about all of those customers that are being helped. And if you can have that line of communication with your consumers where you see that you're actually helping in some way,
Mm,
that I'm sure you have the exact same, where you have consumers that and clients that you're helping.
yeah.
There's a very powerful thing that goes on when you've got that dialogue. And frankly, if you don't have that dialogue, figuring out how you might be able to have that dialogue is so key.
And that's what you have always spoken about, purpose-driven organization. For as long as you can revisit the basics, for as long as you can revisit why you started the organization at the very first place, you'll always get the necessary fuel that could help you to propel forward and take another step. Kara, I know that we have got only 2 minutes left. If you were to revisit and give a piece of advice to your 21-year-old self, what would that be?
Stop trying to force things to happen,
Hmm.
and instead continue being curious, continue uh, jumping in and wanting to explore and take on the journey and learn. That I think, what is the saying? Rome wasn't built in a day, I think is something that I think back on now. Rome certainly wasn't built in a day. A hint wasn't built in a day. We're 16 years old.
Yeah.
And so I think it's looking at life as a learning experience and really taking that to heart, and thinking along the way. Being, I think, the most exhausting part of any entrepreneurial journey or life is that there's so many opportunities along the way, and you have to pay attention and you have to listen to clues along the way. And so I think just really appreciating that time, and maybe the kickoff of being able to, at age 21, know what was in front of you. None of us have a crystal ball,
Hmm.
but I think it's just, if you think about life as lots of things will happen instead of they're supposed to happen,
Hmm.
right? It's a very, very different thing in that you have to be aware. You have to not try and put a round peg into a square hole, right? All of those things, I think, are things, lessons for the 21-year-old self that I would
Yeah.
like to have heard.
As you said, don't force it. Just be curious, be open, and let things happen. So, Kara, if you would share that, having gone through this beautiful experience, having led the organization, which is 16 years old, not 16 years old, it's 16 years young, what do you know for sure with 100% certainty and surety?
That I've enjoyed doing something that I was curious about. I've enjoyed building something that helps people. And we've made a dent in a bigger than a dent into the beverage industry, coming from somebody who had no beverage experience, where people were saying early on, this is a stupid idea. You don't have experience. You've never worked at Coca-Cola or Pepsi, so therefore you won't be able to do what you're setting out to do. And I think we have been able to do everything that
Yeah.
we had set out to do, and more.
Yeah. So, starting from where people were doubting to running an organization which is over $150 million today, it's not a small foot. So, wishing you all the very best, Kara. Such a pleasure having you here. And as I
Thank
always
you.
share, this is just the beginning. I'm sure you have miles to go before you sleep.
Thank you
Shukrana.
so much.
Such a pleasure it was having you.
Thank you.